The wedding hall was filled with the kind of silence that feels heavy, almost suffocating. Just moments before, the air had been alive with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the hushed excitement that always lingers before vows are exchanged. The bride, radiant in white, stood at the altar, her smile trembling with emotion. The groom reached for her hand, his eyes steady, certain. But then, a chair scraped against the floor. Every head turned. The bride's sister, pale and visibly shaking, rose to her feet. She cleared her throat once, then again, as though the weight of her words pressed against her chest, refusing to come out. And when they did, they weren't just words. They were a confession, raw, unfiltered, and devastating. Gasps rippled through the room. Eyes darted between the bride, the sister, and the groom. What came next didn't just halt the wedding. It shattered the very foundation of trust that bound them together. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because to understand how this wedding turned into a scandal, how a single confession destroyed years of promises, and why the groom's response left everyone in shock, we need to go back. Her name was Claire. To her friends, she was the kind of woman people described as gentle and trusting, someone who believed in happy endings. And that day, standing at the altar, she was more than just a bride, she was a believer. She believed in love, in loyalty, in the promise that the man holding her hand would never let her down. That man, Michael, was everything her family admired: charismatic, ambitious, the kind of groom who could charm a room with nothing more than a smile. To everyone else he seemed steady, dependable. But behind that smile was a man with shadows no one had taken the time to see. And then there was Anna, Claire's younger sister. She had always been the supportive one, the one people overlooked, the one who kept her thoughts quiet. But silence often hides the loudest truths. On that wedding day, Anna could no longer stay quiet. The church was magnificent, adorned with ivory flowers and candlelight, a picture-perfect setting for a love story about to be sealed. Family members lined the pews, guests whispered with excitement, and yet, under all that beauty, a tension pulsed like an undercurrent. Claire thought she was moments away from happiness. Michael thought he had everything under control. And Anna, her hands trembling in her lap, knew something that threatened to unravel everything. Why had she been avoiding her sister's eyes all week? Why had her voice faltered every time Michael entered the room? No one had asked, and maybe no one wanted to know. But that silence was about to end. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a battle between truth and appearances. And the moment Anna stood up, the lines between loyalty, love, and betrayal blurred in a way no one present could have prepared for. Weeks before the wedding, subtle cracks had already begun to show. Claire couldn't explain it, but she sensed a distance in her sister that felt new, foreign. Anna, who used to laugh easily and chatter about everything from work stress to late-night movies, had grown quieter. Her eyes lingered on the floor more often than they met anyone else's. When Claire asked if something was wrong, Anna would brush it off with a tight smile and a hurried excuse. There were moments, small, almost unnoticeable, when the room would grow heavy if Michael entered. A strange silence fell, and Anna's body seemed to stiffen as though she was holding something back. Claire wondered about it in passing, but like many brides preoccupied with dress fittings and guest lists, she convinced herself it was just nerves. What she didn't know was that Anna was carrying a secret so heavy, silence was no longer protection. It was a prison. The awkwardness deepened as the wedding approached. Claire recalled one evening when she stepped into the kitchen unexpectedly, only to see Michael leaning in close to Anna. Their voices were low, sharp, urgent. The moment they noticed her, they stepped apart quickly. Michael offered an easy smile and said they had been discussing a minor detail about the ceremony. But the way Anna's hands trembled as she held her glass, the way her lips pressed tight against words she didn't dare speak, it lingered in Claire's mind long after. Another night, Claire reached for Michael's phone to show him a funny message, only to find it locked with a code she didn't know. He brushed it off as a work precaution, but his tone was unusually defensive. Why did the sister avoid eye contact? And why was the groom's phone always locked? At the time, Claire let it go. But no one imagined the secret they were carrying, until the wedding day. The first sign that something was truly wrong came in the form of a message Claire could never forget. It was late in the evening, the night after her bridal shower, when her phone lit up with an unknown number. The text was short, almost cold, and yet it carried a weight that stole her breath. Don't marry him. He isn't who you think he is. At first, Claire laughed nervously, telling herself it was a prank, maybe even a jealous ex trying to stir trouble. But the words lodged themselves in her chest, refusing to let her sleep. She thought of Michael's late nights at the office, of the times he'd left abruptly to take calls in another room. She wanted to confront him, but fear of seeming paranoid silenced her. Instead, she deleted the message, convincing herself it meant nothing. What she didn't know was that it meant everything. The wedding rehearsal only deepened her unease. Claire slipped away from the crowd to touch up her makeup, only to find Anna locked inside the bathroom, sobbing into her hands. When Claire knocked gently, Anna's reply was quick, desperate, "I'm fine. Just nerves." But her voice betrayed her. The tremble, the weight of hidden grief, Claire could hear it clearly. For a moment, she considered pushing harder, demanding answers, but she let it go. After all, Anna had always been sensitive. Still, the image of her sister's tear-streaked face would not leave her mind. There was a story behind those tears, a story Anna wasn't ready to tell. And what Claire didn't know was that her sister was preparing for something huge. Michael, too, began to grow more restless. He claimed work emergencies demanded his sudden disappearances, trips out of town with no warning, phone calls at midnight that ended in hushed arguments. Each time, he returned with excuses rehearsed so smoothly, they almost seemed believable. Almost. Claire noticed the way he silenced his phone when she walked into the room, the way he snapped at small questions. Doubt crept in slowly, unwelcome but impossible to shake. But the truth wasn't about betrayal alone, it was darker. And as the wedding day drew closer, those secrets pressed harder against the surface, waiting for the moment they would explode. The wedding day arrived with all the beauty one could imagine. Sunlight filtered gently through stained glass windows, casting colors across the polished wooden floor. The scent of roses and lilies filled the air, mingling with the faint rustle of dresses and the quiet murmur of guests taking their seats. Smiles were everywhere, friends exchanging warm glances, family members whispering about how radiant Claire looked. Yet beneath the laughter and the music, there was something unspoken. It was as though a thread of unease pulled quietly at the edges of the celebration, noticed by no one but felt by everyone. Claire, radiant and hopeful, stood tall, her hands trembling only with joy. Michael, however, seemed unnaturally calm, too composed for a man moments away from a lifetime vow. And then there was Anna. Her face was pale, drained of color, her fingers tapping anxiously against the hem of her dress as though each second tightened the weight in her chest. As the ceremony began, the contrast between them became sharper. Claire glowed, her eyes never leaving the man she loved. Michael smiled effortlessly, but his eyes, sharp, controlled, revealed nothing. Anna, seated only a few feet away, fidgeted endlessly. She adjusted her bracelet, twisted the ring on her finger, pressed her lips together as though containing words that threatened to spill. Each time the minister spoke of promises, of faithfulness, her shoulders stiffened. Guests noticed her distraction, though most dismissed it as nerves, nothing more. But Claire could see it. Even in her moment of joy, she caught glimpses of her sister's unease, and deep inside, her heart faltered for just a second. Something was wrong, though she couldn't yet name it. The vows were spoken with a trembling beauty. Claire's voice cracked as she promised forever, her tears soft and joyful. Michael repeated his words smoothly, his tone rehearsed, steady. And as the minister prepared to seal the moment, silence fell. It was the pause before the two most important words, "I do." But before those words could be spoken, a movement shattered the quiet. Anna rose suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Gasps filled the air as every head turned. Her face was pale, her breath short, her voice trembling as she said, "I can't stay silent anymore." In that instant, time itself seemed to stop. And yet, what she confessed wasn't what anyone expected. The silence that followed Anna's words was almost unbearable. Dozens of eyes fixed on her, waiting, desperate for an explanation. Her lips quivered as she took a breath, her hands gripping the back of the wooden chair in front of her as though she needed it to stay upright. "Michael isn't the man you think he is," she whispered, her voice cracking. Claire's smile faded instantly, confusion washing over her features. Anna looked at her sister, tears gathering in her eyes, and then she said the words that would fracture the day forever, "I've been seeing him, for months." The air split with gasps. The minister froze, his book clutched tightly in his hands. The groom's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. And Claire, her knees buckled beneath her, her bouquet slipping from her hand as she collapsed against the altar rail, unable to process what she had just heard. The uproar was immediate. Voices rose in disbelief, some crying out in anger, others in confusion. Guests leaned forward, whispering frantically, their faces twisted with shock. A woman in the back shook her head violently, covering her mouth as if trying to erase what she'd just heard. And yet Anna wasn't finished. Her voice grew stronger, steadier, as if years of silence had finally given way to an unstoppable truth. "I didn't plan it," she said, tears streaking her face. "But it happened. And now, I'm pregnant with his child." The words seemed to echo in the cavernous room, each syllable crashing into the walls before sinking into every heart present. Claire gasped audibly, her sobs breaking through the chaos, her dreams dissolving in an instant. What had moments ago been a celebration of love was now a battlefield of betrayal. But instead of breaking, instead of crumbling under the weight of truth, the groom's next move shocked everyone. For a long moment after Anna's confession, the groom said nothing. His silence was louder than the gasps, louder than the whispers that rippled through the church. Claire clutched the edge of the altar, tears streaming down her face, searching his eyes for denial, for outrage, for anything that would prove her sister's words false. Instead, Michael straightened his shoulders, adjusted his tie, and spoke with a calmness that chilled everyone present. "It's true," he said simply. His voice did not tremble. He did not flinch beneath the weight of scandal. "Anna isn't lying." A wave of shock coursed through the room. Some guests shouted in disbelief, others cried out in anger. Claire's sobs grew louder, her entire body shaking as the man she loved confirmed the unthinkable. But before the silence could settle, Michael continued, his words sharp, deliberate, and far more complicated than anyone had expected. "Yes, we were together," he admitted, his tone unwavering. "But what she hasn't told you is why." His eyes locked onto Anna's, and for the first time that day she looked away. Gasps grew louder as Michael pressed on. "She threatened me. She said if I didn't give her what she wanted, she would ruin this wedding. She wasn't just a bystander in this, she orchestrated it." The room erupted into chaos once more, voices clashing as loyalties divided. Some sided with Anna, pointing to her tears, her trembling hands as proof of truth. Others defended Michael, convinced his calm and steady words carried the weight of honesty. Claire, caught in the storm, stood paralyzed. Her gaze darted between her sister and her groom, each word pulling her heart in opposite directions. Who was lying? Who was telling the truth? And most of all, what would become of the marriage that had already begun to crumble before it even started? The room had descended into pure chaos. Guests shouted over one another, accusations flew across the aisle, and yet in the center of it all stood Claire, her white dress stained with tears, her heart torn between the two people she loved most. She looked at her sister, whose face was streaked with anguish, then at Michael, who held himself with unnerving calm. For a brief second, she wanted to believe there was still a way forward, that this nightmare could be undone. But then she saw it, the absence of remorse in his eyes, the weight of betrayal she could never unsee. Her voice, though broken, carried across the hall as she whispered words that silenced the uproar. "This wedding is over." Gasps erupted once again, but this time they came not from a confession, but from a decision. Claire removed the ring from her finger, placed it gently on the altar, and stepped back. Michael's composure cracked for the first time. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched, and yet he said nothing to stop her. Perhaps he knew the damage was irreversible, or perhaps he never intended to fight for the marriage at all. Anna reached out as if to comfort her sister, but Claire recoiled, her eyes filled not with hatred, but with sorrow deeper than words could hold. "You've both taken enough from me," she said softly, her voice trembling but resolute. And in that moment, the wedding that had begun with hope ended in ruins. The guests sat in stunned silence, the minister's book left half open, the flowers and music now mocking the devastation. In a single moment, everything they had built, destroyed. In the days that followed, silence became Claire's closest companion. The laughter of her wedding day was replaced by the hollow sound of unanswered questions. Friends reached out, family tried to comfort her, but Claire stood firm in her decision. She had walked away not because she stopped believing in love, but because she finally believed in herself. She vowed never to ignore her instincts again, never to confuse charm for truth. The ring, once a symbol of forever, now lay forgotten in a small box on her dresser, not as a reminder of heartbreak, but as proof that even shattered beginnings can lead to strength. In private moments, she whispered to herself that she would heal, and in time she did. Anna, however, found herself in a far darker place. Some believed her, applauding her courage to speak the truth when it mattered most. Others condemned her, whispering that jealousy had fueled her confession, that she had sought to ruin her sister's happiness out of bitterness. Whichever side was right, Anna carried the weight of isolation. She was no longer just a sister, she was the woman who had shattered a wedding, her face remembered by every guest who had sat in that church. She spent her days torn between shame and a desperate need to justify her actions. wondering if silence would have spared them all or if truth, however painful, had been the only choice. And Michael? He disappeared from the picture entirely. Some said he left town, too ashamed to face the families he had deceived. Others claimed he remained, but in shadows, facing consequences that were never made public. Whether punished or forgotten, his absence spoke louder than his presence ever could. He had lost them both, the woman he had promised his life to, and the one whose confession ended it all. In the end, nothing remained of the man who once stood so confidently at the altar. Love, betrayal, and the price of secrets. This wedding became a cautionary tale. What do you think? Was the sister right to confess? Or should she have stayed silent? Was the groom's reaction justified? If you were in Claire's position, would you have walked away, or tried to rebuild what was broken? And so, from a day that was meant to unite two hearts came a story that split an entire family, leaving behind scars, questions, and lessons that may never fade. If this story shocked you like it did us, hit that like button. It really helps us out. Comment below, whose side would you take? The bride, the groom, or the sister? We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you're new here, subscribe for more real-life scandals and shocking stories every single week. Until next time, remember, truth may hurt but silence can destroy.